The crown on his desk was the last thing she ever gave him. He thought it was a symbol of their love. He did not know it was her final goodbye. Charlotte Whitmore stood alone in the grand halls of Aurelian Palace, watching the candles slowly fade across the empty anniversary table. The celebration had been prepared for weeks. Every detail was chosen carefully. The flowers, the music, the small memories placed around the room. It was supposed to be a night where she and King Nathaniel Carter remembered the beginning of their journey together. Their first anniversary as king and queen. Their first year building a life that everyone believed was perfect. But the chair across from her remained empty. Hours passed. The servants quietly removed the untouched dinner. The musicians left without playing a single song. And Charlotte finally understood something she had been trying not to accept. Nathaniel had not simply forgotten a date. He had forgotten the person waiting for him. For years, Charlotte had convinced herself that being a queen meant understanding sacrifice. She understood the endless meetings, the constant responsibilities, and the pressure that came with the crown. She never expected Nathaniel to choose her over the kingdom. She never asked him to abandon his duties. She only wanted him to remember that behind the title of queen was a woman who loved him, a woman who had given everything to stand beside him. When they first met, Nathaniel had not seen her as a royal figure. He saw Charlotte. He saw the woman who laughed at simple things, who dreamed about creating a better future, who believed they could build something meaningful together. But after the wedding, everything changed slowly. The kingdom needed a queen. The court needed a symbol. The people needed perfection. And somewhere between ceremonies and responsibilities, Charlotte became someone everyone admired but no one truly knew. That night, she did not cry. She did not create a scene. She did not send angry messages throughout the palace. Instead, she walked quietly to Nathaniel's private study and placed something on his desk. Her crown. The same crown she wore during every royal ceremony. The same crown that represented everything she had sacrificed. Beside it was a simple letter. Not a letter filled with accusations. Not a letter meant to punish him. Just the truth she had carried for too long. Charlotte wrote that she was grateful for the years they shared. She wrote that she would always respect the man he was. But she could no longer continue being a queen who disappeared behind her own crown. The next morning, Nathaniel entered his study expecting another ordinary day. He expected reports, meetings, and decisions waiting for his attention. He did not expect to see the one thing that represented Charlotte's place beside him. The crown sat quietly on the desk. For a moment, he simply stared at it. He thought about the anniversary. He thought about the empty room. He thought about Charlotte waiting while he chose another responsibility over her. Then he opened the letter. And for the first time, Nathaniel realized the truth he had ignored for far too long. Charlotte was not leaving because she stopped loving him. She was leaving because she had spent too many years loving him while forgetting herself. The king who commanded an entire kingdom suddenly faced the one thing he could not order or control. The possibility that the woman who had always stood beside him was finally choosing to stand for herself. Charlotte Whitmore had always known the palace would notice her absence. She had not expected it to feel so different when she was the one who finally chose to leave. For years, every room in Aurelian Palace carried a piece of her life. The grand halls where she greeted visitors. The council chambers where she quietly supported Nathaniel's decisions. The gardens where she once believed they would spend their happiest moments together. But after leaving the crown behind, Charlotte discovered something she had almost forgotten. She could exist without being needed by everyone else. The first morning away from the palace was strangely peaceful. There were no servants asking about royal schedules. No advisors waiting for her approval. No ceremonies requiring a perfect smile. For the first time in years, Charlotte woke up without wondering what the kingdom expected from her. She was simply Charlotte. Before becoming queen, she had been a woman with dreams of her own. She loved history, research, and discovering forgotten stories from the past. She once imagined creating a place where knowledge could be shared freely. But after marrying Nathaniel, her dreams slowly moved to the background. Not because he asked her to abandon them. Not because anyone directly told her they did not matter. They disappeared because she kept choosing everyone else first. Now, in a small estate outside the capital, Charlotte opened the old journals she had not touched in years. The pages contained ideas, notes, and plans from a younger version of herself. A woman who believed she could make a difference. A woman who was not defined by a title. As she read those words again, Charlotte realized something important. She had not left the palace because she hated her life. She left because she wanted to find the person she had been before she became only a symbol. Meanwhile, inside Aurelian Palace, Nathaniel struggled with a feeling he could not explain. The kingdom continued as usual. Meetings continued. Decisions were made. The crown remained on his head. But everything felt strangely incomplete. He walked through the palace and noticed details he had never paid attention to before. The flowers in the main hall that Charlotte personally selected every season. The reports organized with notes she had prepared. The small reminders throughout his office that made his difficult days easier. Nathaniel had always seen the results of Charlotte's efforts. He had rarely seen the effort itself. When advisors asked about the queen, he found himself unable to answer simple questions. Where was she planning to go next? What were her dreams beyond the palace? What did she want when she was not fulfilling her role? The questions bothered him because he realized he did not know. Not because Charlotte had hidden herself from him, because he had stopped looking. One evening, Nathaniel returned to his study and saw the empty space where her crown had been placed. The room felt different without it. Not because the crown was missing, because he finally understood what it represented. It was never just a royal object. It represented every responsibility Charlotte carried, every moment she stood beside him, and every sacrifice she made without asking for recognition. Nathaniel read her letter again. This time, he noticed the words he had ignored before. Charlotte had not written about anger. She had written about loneliness. She had not accused him of being a bad king. She had simply explained that she could no longer be a forgotten person inside a perfect image. For the first time, Nathaniel wondered how many times Charlotte had tried to reach him before that night. How many conversations had he delayed? How many moments had he assumed could wait until later? The king who had spent years protecting a kingdom finally faced a truth he could not avoid. The person he should have protected most was the one who had been standing beside him all along. Nathaniel Carter had spent his entire life believing that responsibility was the highest form of love. As king of Aurelian, he was taught that every decision had consequences, every moment belonged to the kingdom, and personal desires had to wait. For years, he believed Charlotte understood that better than anyone. She was always patient, always supportive, always there when he needed her. What he failed to understand was that Charlotte's patience had a limit, not because her love disappeared, but because she had spent too long giving without being seen. After her departure, Nathaniel began searching through the memories of their marriage with a different perspective. He looked at old conversations, forgotten moments, and small details he once considered unimportant. The more he remembered, the more he realized how often Charlotte had tried to tell him what she needed. The signs had always been there. He simply never stopped long enough to notice them. He remembered the evening she asked if they could have dinner together without discussing royal matters. He remembered promising that they would find time later. He remembered the day she showed him her research ideas and he told her they could discuss them after the next council meeting. He remembered every promise of later. The painful truth was that later had become years. One afternoon, Nathaniel entered the palace library and discovered a collection of Charlotte's old writings. They were not official documents. They were personal notes from before she became queen. He found drawings of educational programs, plans for historical preservation, and ideas she had once dreamed of bringing to life. He sat quietly as he read through the pages. He realized Charlotte had not become someone different after marriage. She had simply hidden parts of herself because she thought being a good queen meant putting everything else aside. For the first time, Nathaniel wondered if he had loved Charlotte as a person or only as the perfect partner who made his life easier. The question stayed with him because he knew the answer was uncomfortable. He loved her, but he had not truly seen her. Meanwhile, Charlotte continued rebuilding her life away from the palace. She accepted an invitation to help organize a new academic program in the countryside. It was not a royal project. It was not connected to Nathaniel. It was something she chose because it belonged to her. Every day, she felt herself returning to the person she had forgotten. She spent mornings studying, afternoons meeting with scholars, and evenings writing ideas that had once remained unfinished. She discovered that freedom was not about leaving behind everything she loved. It was about no longer abandoning herself. News of Charlotte's work eventually reached the capital. People who once knew her only as the queen began hearing about her achievements. They learned about her intelligence, her creativity, and her dedication. The kingdom was beginning to see what Nathaniel had overlooked. Charlotte had never been valuable because she wore a crown. The crown was valuable because someone like Charlotte had worn it. When Nathaniel heard people praising Charlotte, he felt a mixture of pride and regret. He was proud because she was finally receiving the recognition she deserved. He regretted that it took losing her presence for him to understand her importance. One evening, Nathaniel returned to the place where Charlotte had left her crown. He stood before the empty desk and remembered the woman who had once placed it there. He realized she had not abandoned the kingdom. She had not abandoned their history. She had simply refused to abandon herself any longer. And for the first time, Nathaniel understood the meaning behind her final gift. Charlotte had not left him a crown because she wanted him to remember her title. She left it because she wanted him to remember the woman who had been underneath it all along. Charlotte Whitmore never expected that leaving the palace would reveal how much of herself she had forgotten. She thought she was walking away from a title, a responsibility, and a life filled with expectations. But as the days passed, she realized she was not losing anything that truly belonged to her. Instead, she was finally finding the parts of herself that had been quietly waiting to return. In the countryside estate where she now lived, Charlotte created a routine that felt unfamiliar at first but slowly became natural. She spent her mornings surrounded by books and research materials. She walked through gardens without needing to prepare for royal appearances. She spoke with people who knew her not because of her crown, but because of her ideas and character. For the first time in years, she did not have to wonder how every decision would affect the image of a queen. She could simply make choices as Charlotte. The change was noticed by everyone around her. Scholars who worked with her admired her dedication. Young students listened to her stories about history and learning. The people she met saw a woman who carried wisdom and kindness without needing a royal title to prove her importance. Charlotte began to understand that her crown had never created her value. It only displayed a small part of who she already was. Back in Aurelian Palace, Nathaniel continued struggling with the reality of her absence. He had expected the kingdom to feel different without the queen beside him, but he never imagined how much her presence had shaped his daily life. He noticed the quiet spaces where Charlotte used to sit. He noticed the missing conversations that once helped him see situations from another perspective. He noticed how often he searched for her opinion before remembering she was no longer there. One afternoon, Nathaniel attended a council meeting where advisors discussed a new educational initiative. The proposal reminded him of Charlotte's old ideas. Years earlier, she had mentioned similar plans, but he had treated them as something to consider later. Now, seeing others recognize the importance of those ideas, he understood what he had failed to appreciate. Charlotte had never simply supported his rule. She had been someone who helped him become a better leader. After the meeting, Nathaniel returned to the royal library and opened another collection of Charlotte's writings. This time, he was not searching for memories. He was searching for understanding. He found notes about the challenges she faced as queen. He found reflections about the pressure of representing the kingdom while trying to maintain her own identity. He found moments where she had questioned whether anyone saw Charlotte beyond the crown. The words affected him deeply because they revealed a loneliness he had never noticed. Nathaniel had always believed that because Charlotte stood beside him, she felt included in his world. He never considered that she might feel invisible inside it. Meanwhile, Charlotte received a message from the academy inviting her to lead a long-term research project. Years ago, she would have hesitated. She would have wondered whether accepting the opportunity would create problems for Nathaniel or the palace. This time, she accepted without guilt. It was not a rejection of her past. It was a promise to her future. When Nathaniel heard about her decision, he felt a mixture of emotions. He was proud of her. He was happy that she had found something that brought her fulfillment. But he also understood something painful. The woman he loved was no longer waiting for him to notice her. She had learned how to shine without needing his approval. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson he needed to learn. Love was not about keeping someone close because they completed your life. Love was about appreciating them as a whole person, even when their light existed beyond you. For the first time, Nathaniel did not want Charlotte to return because the palace needed a queen. He wanted to know if he could become the kind of person who deserved Charlotte's trust again. Nathaniel Carter had always believed that a king should never hesitate. Every decision required confidence. Every challenge required strength. Every uncertainty had to be hidden behind the image of a ruler who always knew what to do. But after Charlotte Whitmore left the palace, Nathaniel discovered the one decision he had avoided for too long. He needed to understand the woman he loved before it was too late. For the first time, he stopped looking for ways to bring Charlotte back and started looking for ways to understand why she left. He began reading the journals she had written during their marriage. Not the official documents prepared for the queen, not the reports that carried her royal signature. He read the private thoughts she had kept for herself. The pages revealed a side of Charlotte he had never truly known. She wrote about her hopes, her worries, and the moments when she felt like she was slowly disappearing behind her responsibilities. She wrote about wanting to share ideas with Nathaniel, wanting to create projects together, and wanting to feel like a partner instead of a decoration beside the throne. Nathaniel read every page carefully. Each sentence showed him a moment he had missed. Each memory reminded him of a conversation he had postponed or a promise he had forgotten. The realization was difficult because Charlotte had never demanded perfection from him. She never asked him to stop being king. She only wanted him to remember that she was the person standing beside him. Meanwhile, Charlotte continued building her new life. The research program she accepted became one of the most successful projects at the Academy. She worked with historians, teachers, and young scholars who valued her knowledge and creativity. They did not ask about the crown she left behind. They asked about her ideas. They wanted to hear her opinions. They respected her because of who she was. This simple change meant more to Charlotte than she expected. For years, she had been surrounded by people who respected the queen. Now she was surrounded by people who appreciated Charlotte. One afternoon, while reviewing her latest research, Charlotte received a letter from the palace. She expected another official message. Instead, it was from Nathaniel. The letter was different from the ones she had received before. It did not contain royal orders. It did not ask her to return. It did not mention duty or tradition. Nathaniel simply wrote that he wanted to speak with her when she was ready. Charlotte read the letter several times. A part of her remembered the man she had loved from the beginning. Another part remembered the loneliness she carried for years. She understood that forgiveness was not the same as forgetting. Trust was not rebuilt in a single conversation. Still, she appreciated that Nathaniel was finally approaching her as Charlotte, not as the queen he needed beside him. Back in the palace, Nathaniel prepared for their meeting with a different mindset. In the past, he would have planned a grand gesture. He would have searched for the perfect words to convince her. This time, he understood that Charlotte did not need a performance. She needed honesty. He did not want to prove that he was still the king. He wanted to show that he was finally learning how to be a better partner. When the day arrived, Nathaniel traveled to the Academy without a royal ceremony. He arrived simply as himself. As he walked through the halls and saw Charlotte surrounded by her own achievements, he felt something he had not expected. He felt proud, not because she belonged to him, but because she had become someone extraordinary on her own. When Charlotte saw him, she remained calm. There was no anger in her expression, no need to punish him for the past. She had already moved beyond that. But there was also no rush to return to the life she left behind. Nathaniel understood immediately. The woman standing before him was not waiting to be chosen. She had already chosen herself. And if he wanted a place in her future, he would have to prove that he could value the person she had become. Nathaniel Carter arrived at the Academy carrying no royal announcement, no official request, and no expectations that Charlotte Whitmore would immediately forgive him. For the first time in their relationship, he understood that his position as king could not solve a personal mistake. A crown could command attention, but it could not create trust. As he walked through the quiet halls of the Academy, Nathaniel felt a strange sense of humility. This place represented everything Charlotte had built after leaving the palace. It was not a reminder of what she had lost. It was proof of what she had found. When he finally saw her, Charlotte was standing beside a table filled with research papers and old historical documents. She looked peaceful, not because the past no longer mattered, but because she had learned how to move forward without being trapped by it. "Thank you for coming," she said calmly. Nathaniel nodded. "Thank you for giving me the chance to speak with you." They walked through the Academy gardens together, surrounded by trees and flowers that created a quiet distance from the responsibilities of the palace. Nathaniel did not begin with excuses. He did not explain how difficult ruling had been or how many responsibilities had occupied his time. Those explanations might have been true, but he finally understood they were not the answer Charlotte needed. I spent years believing that because I loved you, you knew how important you were to me, Nathaniel said. But I understand now that love is not only something you feel. It is something you show. Charlotte listened carefully. She had heard promises before. She had heard intentions before. The difference now was that Nathaniel was not asking her to forget the past. I should have noticed when you became quieter, he continued. I should have noticed when you stopped sharing your ideas. I should have noticed when you stopped asking me to make time for you. His voice became softer. The truth is, I became comfortable with your kindness. I thought you would always be there because you always had been. Charlotte looked at him. That was the hardest part, Nathaniel. I did not leave because I stopped caring. I left because I realized I was disappearing. The words were painful, but Nathaniel did not look away. He accepted them because he knew they were true. I know, he said, and I am sorry that it took losing your presence for me to understand your value. Charlotte looked toward the garden. She remembered the woman she had been before leaving the palace. A woman who wanted love, but had forgotten that love should not require silence. I appreciate your apology, she said, but I need you to understand something. I cannot return to the person I was before. Nathaniel nodded immediately. I do not want you to. His answer surprised her. The woman I want to know is the one standing here now. The woman who has her own dreams, her own achievements, and her own voice. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was no longer filled with disappointment. It was filled with honesty. Nathaniel realized that rebuilding their relationship would require patience. He could not expect one conversation to repair years of distance. He could only continue showing through his actions that Charlotte mattered. Not because she was the queen, not because she completed his image as a king, but because she was Charlotte. Over the following weeks, Nathaniel began visiting the academy regularly. He listened to her work, asked about her research, and respected the time she dedicated to her own goals. He no longer treated her dreams as something that could wait. He treated them as something important. Charlotte noticed the difference. She did not rush to return to the palace. She did not ignore the lessons she had learned. But she began to believe that perhaps the man she loved was finally learning how to see her. And perhaps, after losing the life they once knew, they had the opportunity to create something more honest than before. Charlotte Whitmore never expected that the hardest part of leaving the palace would not be walking away from the crown. It would be learning how to trust someone again after spending so long feeling unseen. She had rebuilt her life carefully. She had created a place where her thoughts mattered, where her ideas were valued, and where she was known as Charlotte instead of only the queen. That independence was something she would never give up again. But as Nathaniel Carter continued showing up, she began noticing something different. He was not trying to bring back the woman who had waited for him in the palace. He was making an effort to understand the woman standing in front of him now. Months passed, and their conversations became easier. They talked about history, the future of the kingdom, and the dreams Charlotte had once hidden away. Nathaniel asked questions he should have asked years earlier. He wanted to know what inspired her, what challenged her, and what goals she wanted to achieve. For Charlotte, those small moments meant more than any grand gesture ever could. Because for the first time, Nathaniel was not simply listening because he needed her advice as queen. He was listening because he cared about Charlotte as a person. Still, Charlotte remained careful. She had learned an important lesson. Love without self-respect was not enough. She could appreciate Nathaniel's changes while still protecting the identity she had fought to rebuild. One evening, Nathaniel invited Charlotte to visit the palace gardens. It was the same place where they had once dreamed about their future together. Years earlier, Charlotte had walked there believing that love meant always standing beside him, no matter how invisible she felt. Now, she returned as someone who understood her own worth. As they walked beneath the old trees, Nathaniel looked around quietly. I used to think this garden reminded me of the beginning of our marriage, he said. Charlotte smiled softly. It was a beautiful time. Nathaniel nodded. But I think I remember it differently now. She looked at him. How? He paused before answering. Back then, I only remembered how happy I was. I never stopped to ask if you were happy too. Charlotte was silent for a moment. The honesty in his words mattered because it showed that he was no longer only focused on his own feelings. He was finally seeing the relationship from her perspective. I spent so much time trying to be the perfect queen, Charlotte said. I forgot that I was allowed to simply be myself. Nathaniel looked at her with understanding. and I spent so much time trying to be the perfect king that I forgot the person who was standing beside me. The conversation did not magically erase the past. They both knew that, but it created something they had never truly had before. A foundation built on honesty. When Nathaniel returned to the palace, he continued changing the way he led. He included Charlotte's ideas not because she was his wife, but because her knowledge deserved recognition. He encouraged her projects and supported her independence. The court began seeing the difference as well. The king was no longer trying to restore the old relationship. He was building a new one. Charlotte noticed that Nathaniel was not asking for forgiveness every day. Instead, he was proving his sincerity through consistent actions. That mattered more than words. One afternoon, Charlotte received an invitation to attend an important royal event. Years ago, she would have accepted because it was expected of her as queen. This time, she accepted because she wanted to share that moment. The difference was small, but it changed everything. She was no longer returning because she felt obligated. She was choosing to be there, and Nathaniel understood the meaning behind that choice. Their story was no longer about a king trying to reclaim what he had lost. It was about two people discovering that love could become stronger when both of them were free to be themselves. Charlotte Whitmore had once believed that returning to the palace would mean returning to the life she had left behind. She thought the halls, the ceremonies, and the expectations would remind her of the person she used to be. But when she stepped into Aurelian Palace again, she realized something important. The palace had not changed. She had. The woman who once walked through those halls searching for approval was gone. In her place stood someone who knew her own value. Charlotte did not return as someone looking for a place beside the king. She returned as someone who already had a place in the world. Nathaniel Carter noticed the difference immediately. He no longer saw a queen who existed to support his image. He saw a woman with her own goals, her own thoughts, and her own strength. The change between them was not dramatic. There were no grand announcements or promises made in front of the court. Instead, it appeared in small moments. Nathaniel asked for Charlotte's opinion and truly listened to her answer. He made time for conversations instead of assuming there would always be another day. He supported her projects because he believed in their importance, not because they reflected well on the royal family. For Charlotte, those actions mattered more than anything else. She had once waited for Nathaniel to notice what she needed. Now, she watched him choose to notice. During a royal gathering, Charlotte stood beside Nathaniel once again. The court expected to see the same king and queen they had always known. But what they saw was different. Charlotte was no longer standing quietly behind him. She spoke with confidence about her research and the future projects she wanted to create. Nathaniel did not interrupt or take credit for her ideas. He simply stood beside her and allowed her voice to be heard. It was a small moment, but it represented everything that had changed. The crown no longer defined Charlotte. It was only one part of who she was. After the event, Nathaniel and Charlotte walked through the palace gardens. The evening air was calm, and the place that once held memories of loneliness now felt different. "Do you ever miss the way things used to be?" Nathaniel asked. Charlotte thought carefully before answering. "I miss some moments," she said, "but I do not miss losing myself." Nathaniel nodded because he understood. They could not return to the beginning. The beginning was built on dreams, but it also contained the mistakes that brought them here. What they had now was something more honest. "I spent so much time trying to protect everything around me," Nathaniel said. "I forgot that the person closest to me needed protection too." Charlotte looked at him. "I did not need you to protect me from the world." She smiled gently. "I needed you to see me in it." Those words stayed with him, because they represented the lesson he had spent so long learning. Love was not about saving someone. It was about recognizing them. Over the following months, their relationship continued to grow naturally. They created new traditions instead of trying to recreate old ones. They discussed their plans openly. They respected each other's independence. Charlotte continued her work at the academy while fulfilling her responsibilities as queen. Nathaniel continued leading the kingdom while making sure his role never became an excuse to ignore the person beside him. The people of Aurelian began noticing the difference between them. They saw a queen who was respected for her own achievements and a king who understood that partnership was stronger than control. On the anniversary of the day Charlotte left her crown behind, Nathaniel returned to the place where it had all changed. He did not bring another crown. He did not bring a grand symbol of royalty. He brought a simple letter expressing gratitude. He wrote that he was thankful she had been brave enough to choose herself, because that choice gave them the chance to build something better. Charlotte read the letter quietly. Then she smiled. Because the greatest change was not that she had returned to the palace. It was that she no longer needed the palace to know who she was. And Nathaniel finally understood that the greatest gift Charlotte had ever given him was never the crown she left behind. It was the opportunity to love the woman who had always been beneath it. Years after the night Charlotte Whitmore left her crown behind, Aurelian Palace no longer represented a place where she had lost herself. It became a place where she finally understood who she was. The halls that once felt like reminders of her silence became spaces where her voice could be heard. The throne that once seemed to define her became only a symbol of the responsibility she willingly chose to carry. Charlotte had learned that her worth was never created by a title. It existed long before anyone called her queen. Nathaniel Carter learned the same lesson in a different way. He had spent years believing that protecting the kingdom was the greatest responsibility he carried. But through Charlotte, he discovered that leadership was not only about making decisions for thousands of people. It was also about understanding the person standing beside him. The relationship they rebuilt was not the same as the one they had before. It was something stronger because it was built on honesty, respect, and choice. On a quiet morning in the royal gardens, Charlotte walked beside Nathaniel through the place where they had once shared dreams of the future. The flowers had changed with the seasons, and the paths looked slightly different, but the feeling was no longer heavy with memories of disappointment. Instead, it carried the warmth of a new beginning. "Do you remember when I thought wearing the crown would be the hardest part?" Charlotte asked with a small smile. Nathaniel looked at her. "And now?" She looked across the garden. "Now I know the hardest part was forgetting that I was more than the crown." Nathaniel understood those words because he had finally learned the same truth. He had once seen Charlotte as the perfect queen who completed his world. Now he saw her as a person whose world existed beyond him. That difference changed everything. Their love was no longer built on sacrifice from only one side. It was built on two people choosing each other while still respecting who they were individually. The kingdom also changed because of Charlotte's influence. Her educational programs expanded. Her research projects inspired future generations. People no longer spoke about her only because she was the queen beside Nathaniel. They spoke about her because she created meaningful change. Nathaniel was proud every time he heard her name connected to her own achievements. He no longer felt threatened by her independence. He admired it. One evening, Nathaniel returned a small box to Charlotte. Inside was not a new crown or another royal symbol. It was the original letter she had left with her crown years before. "I kept it because I needed to remember the lesson it taught me," he explained. Charlotte opened the letter and saw her own words from the night she chose herself. She remembered the sadness she felt, but she also remembered the courage behind that decision. "I thought that was the end of our story," she said softly. Nathaniel smiled. "Maybe it was the end of the story where we did not understand each other." Charlotte looked at him. "And this one? This is the story where we finally do." Years earlier, Charlotte believed leaving her crown meant losing everything. She later discovered that she had never truly lost anything important. She had gained something far more valuable. She had gained herself. Nathaniel believed the crown was the symbol of what held their kingdom together. He learned that the person who wore it mattered more than the crown itself. Their journey was never about a queen leaving a king behind. It was about two people finding their way back after learning the importance of being seen, respected, and loved for who they truly were. And in the end, the greatest gift Charlotte gave Nathaniel was not the crown she left on his desk. It was the reminder that love cannot survive when someone has to disappear. Real love begins when two people are free to shine together.